Empire Earnings. Build your financial empire.
Over the last 5 years, a quiet friction has crept into the daily lives of the modern workforce. Despite working longer hours and tracking every expense, a growing number of people feel unsure if their money is actually securing their future. This chart visualizes Allianz Life's 2025 retirement study, measuring Americans' confident they can meet financial goals. In 2020, 83% felt they were on track. Now look at 2025. That confidence has fallen 13 points, dropping to exactly 70%. This steep of a drop in half a decade suggests a shift in how people view their financial stability. What changed for those millions of people who lost faith in their own trajectory? While external economic pressures vary, the study identifies a structural vulnerability, a lack of formal planning that leaves individuals exposed when those external conditions shift. Financial confidence is no longer a default state. It is an output that is currently failing for nearly a third of the population. To understand that 13% drop, we have to look at the specific group driving the trend. The Allianz study identifies a core metric. Nearly half of all Americans, 47%, operate entirely without a written plan. This unplanned cohort correlates directly with the drop in financial confidence. Without a document, they struggle forecasting a safe future. Operating on an ad hoc, day-by-day basis acts as a vulnerability multiplier during regular economic shifts. Researchers identified poor financial planning as a major factor in the insecurity identified in the 2025 study. The 53% who do have a plan possess a baseline of structural resilience that the unplanned 47% lacks. The written plan serves as the structural framework required to bridge this confidence gap. Leaving wealth management to memory or spontaneous decision-making leads to statistical insecurity. Formalized documentation is the first line of defense. A financial plan is often treated as a passive administrative chore rather than an active architectural roadmap. Constructing this roadmap requires laying down a mathematical foundation designed to withstand economic forces. The first foundational pillar is a system for managing daily money flow and consumption. The second pillar formalizes the long-term timeline required to accumulate retirement savings. Finally, the third pillar models defensive contingencies explicitly designed for weathering sudden economic hardships. These three elements interact systemically. Daily management fuels the retirement timeline, while hardship contingencies protect that timeline from collapsing. If a pillar is missing, the entire structure is compromised. A failure to plan for hardships can quickly shatter a retirement timeline. A completed roadmap allows individuals to proactively stress test their future before a crisis arrives. This shifts the individual from reactive financial panic to proactive, calculated navigation. The value of a plan is not in predicting the future, but in engineering a framework that makes the future survivable, regardless of unforeseen variables. A common misconception is confusing a basic list of numbers with a strategic roadmap. A static notepad or basic digital spreadsheet often fails adapting to dynamic changes. Static numbers are brittle. A true written plan provides structural security that remains relevant as circumstances shift. The ultimate output of this architecture is peace of mind. In this context, peace of mind is an outcome of risk management, specifically the reduction of the probability of catastrophic financial failure. This psychological security acts as a direct counter to the insecurity identified in the Allianz study. Clarity and documentation removes emotional bias and panic from emergency financial decision-making. The act of writing the plan down forces abstract fears into solvable equations. This process, known as cognitive offloading, frees up mental bandwidth previously consumed by financial stress. A written plan is a psychological tool as much as a financial one, providing the mental security needed to operate confidently. This brings the analysis full circle, connecting the architectural roadmap back to the 13% drop in confidence. Applying the written plan methodology provides a stabilization mechanism for that confidence metric. Transitioning from ad hoc management to a documented strategy directly correlates with a reversal of financial insecurity, achieved by managing daily money, mapping retirement, and weathering inevitable hardships. Documentation is not the final step of financial success. It is the mandatory first step. Remaining in the 47% who lack a plan leaves an individual vulnerable to economic shocks. To secure a financial future and regain peace of mind, stop guessing at the numbers and document your roadmap. Financial planning is objectively a steady, logical progression along a clear path toward a defined long-term goal. Yet despite these clear benefits, a vast demographic of Americans avoids the planning process entirely. This widespread avoidance is often attributed to a lack of financial literacy or mathematical skill. This visualization shows the sudden and abrupt halt caused by a massive, non-mathematical barrier blocking the way forward. Wealth management experts identify the primary barrier to entry as a series of emotional and psychological states. Overcoming this paralysis requires mapping and categorizing these specific psychological bottlenecks. We can analyze the internal composition of this psychological barrier as a measurable three-part taxonomy. This overarching framework is known as the behavioral friction hypothesis. These layers consist of structural uncertainty, fear of negative discovery, and optimization paralysis. Understanding these three specific emotional bottlenecks is essential to diagnosing why the financial planning process fails before it ever begins. We begin by analyzing the first layer of the behavioral taxonomy. Structural uncertainty is the most common emotional barrier encountered by wealth advisors. The primary symptom of this barrier is not knowing the correct first step to initiate a written financial plan. Secondary ambiguity involves professional assistance, specifically the confusion over who is qualified to help. A lack of cost transparency and the fear of hidden fees further contributes to the state of paralysis. Uncertainty regarding inputs, such as what questions to ask or what documents are necessary, creates these distinct dead-end paths in the decision-making process. These individual unknowns compound into a singular, overwhelming psychological block. This is a failure of process, not a deficit in mathematical ability. A written financial plan eventually provides the structured clarity that resolves this initial ambiguity. Structural uncertainty prevents action because the human brain defaults to inaction when the sequence of required steps is unclear. The second layer of the behavioral taxonomy shifts the focus to active deterrence. Fear of negative discovery acts as a defensive mechanism against the planning process. One specific trigger is the anticipation of confirming high, unmanageable debt loads. Another trigger is the fear of realizing insufficient savings accumulation for one's age. This fear is also driven by the dread of discovering timelines that indicate an inability to retire. This leads to information avoidance, where individuals deliberately block warning indicators to maintain a sense of calm. This psychological mechanism relies on the false equation of ignorance with safety. Avoiding this bad news provides a temporary sense of emotional security. However, this temporary comfort ignores the compounding reality of long-term financial risk. Fear of negative discovery causes individuals to prioritize immediate emotional preservation over long-term financial resolution. The final layer of the taxonomy is often mistaken for diligent preparation. Optimization paralysis disguises active avoidance as proactive preparation. One symptom is endlessly evaluating budgeting applications without ever choosing one to use. Another is the exhaustive search for a mathematically perfect retirement account structure. Delaying action while waiting for the economically right time to start is a common manifestation of this paralysis. This behavior forms a perfectionism trap, where the subject cycles through options without ever proceeding down the timeline. Demanding perfection effectively enforces a state of zero progress. Wealth advisors recommend a counterintuitive approach to break this cycle. Jumping into the financial planning process without knowing every answer yields better outcomes than waiting for a perfect solution. Optimization paralysis is a defense mechanism that ensures failure by preventing the process from actually beginning. These three blocks of uncertainty, fear, and perfectionism create the friction that halts the financial journey. These are universal, human responses to financial complexity. But while these emotions are common, they do not justify remaining in a state of inaction. Psychological friction should not prevent the initiation of a written plan. Starting the process provides a mechanical benefit by forcing a confrontation with these barriers. Upon contact, these friction blocks dissolve, opening a structured pathway forward. The act of beginning removes the underlying ambiguities that caused the paralysis. Addressing these emotional barriers is a required component of the analytical process. The ultimate goal of a successful financial plan is to establish a clear operational sequence. A viable financial plan establishes a systemic framework that is emotionally realistic and mathematically achievable. Most people treat personal finance as a simple accounting chore. In reality, managing your money is a complex systems engineering problem. Left unmanaged, the default state of your financial variables, your income, your debts, your daily expenses, is chaotic instability. This instability translates directly into physiological distress, attacking your nervous system as much as your net worth. Financial stress is a leading generator of chronic cognitive load, taxing your mental bandwidth with a constant background pressure. Neutralizing that anxiety requires replacing the chaos with a rigid, engineered operational framework. You have to force your personal ecosystem out of a state of permanent uncertainty and into a state of predictable, mechanical control. Typical budgets often fail because they act as historical ledgers, listing what you already spent, rather than functioning as forward-looking operational guides. A formal financial plan is the mechanism designed to take massive, overwhelming variables and convert them into deterministic steps. We are going to build that architecture from first principles to shift your operational state from guessing to actionable agency. Building this structure provides a reliable mechanism to reclaim permanent psychological control over your future. We begin by clearing out the noise to work within a blank, structured environment. Any functional operational plan rests on three foundational nodes: the current state, the future state, and the action vectors required to connect them. Forcing a massive, abstract problem into these three isolated categories immediately reduces cognitive friction. Instead of fighting every variable at once, the system allows you to solve one discrete systemic problem at a time. Without this structural isolation, moving from blind guesswork to precise action remains impossible. The purpose of this schematic is to strip away uncertainty by making the invisible forces acting on your money visible, measurable, and bound by logic. We begin with Node 1, representing your exact current situation. This node requires raw, unvarnished inputs: your net income, the total sum of your current debts, and your baseline operational expenses. Node 1 acts as a rigid anchor point. Without measuring your exact origin coordinates, you cannot plot a reliable trajectory forward. Every control system, from navigation to power grids, requires an accurate initial starting point to function. Confronting these exact, unfiltered numbers often induces a temporary, acute spike in stress. This temporary stress is a required cost to prevent the chronic, overwhelming cognitive load that results from ignoring the data. Establishing this baseline replaces emotional estimation with hard, objective reality. Once the origin is locked, we move across the schematic to Node 2, the goal state. Without a strictly defined target, financial momentum dissipates in random directions. Defining a realistic target requires context provided by aggregate baseline data. To find that context, we can look to the Federal Reserve, the institution responsible for tracking macroeconomic benchmarks. The Fed conducts systemic surveys to map out consumer financial realities across the country. The 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances provides a specific look at the reality of liquid capital. This data shows that the mean value of American liquid savings is exactly $62,500. That figure is an aggregate of several highly accessible account types. The foundation consists of standard checking and personal savings accounts. It also includes money market accounts and interest-bearing call accounts. The survey also factors in liquid funds held on prepaid debit cards. This $62,500 figure serves as a comparative benchmark to help you calibrate your own Node 2 target based on broader economic realities. Measuring specifically liquid savings is crucial. This cash is immediately accessible, making it the truest benchmark for your operational stability. Utilizing macroeconomic benchmarks allows you to set realistic, data-driven parameters for your goals. With the origin and destination set, we reach Node 3, the action path that bridges your baseline to your goal. This path visualizes the active transition of your resources over time. It takes the gap between your current reality and your goal and slices it into actionable daily steps. Mapping the operational path in this way systematically eliminates guesswork. The action vector is the operational engine that converts static data into undeniable forward momentum. Stepping back, we can observe the control system as a unified architecture. Every variable is categorized, every target is quantified, and the path forward is defined. While the inputs are financial, the most critical output generated by this system is psychological. Implementing this structural plan leads to a measurable reduction in systemic anxiety. The primary driver of financial stress is the absence of control over resources, which creates a more debilitating mental load than a simple lack of capital. This framework neutralizes that mechanism by enforcing strict parameter control over the unknown. When you dictate the operational framework of your finances, you reclaim agency in your life decisions. A financial plan serves as a tool for mental freedom, ensuring your decisions are driven by intent rather than economic pressure. Professional finance utilizes a predictive, deterministic model to allocate resources, moving past the common perception of a budget as a punitive restriction. Most individual financial plans fail because they attempt to impose strict behavioral roles before building the systemic architecture required to support them. We can visualize a robust financial plan as a sequential, four-part operating system. The first requirement is establishing your chronological outputs, defining exactly what the system is engineered to achieve. The second requirement is a data audit, ensuring every calculation is built on an accurate map of your cash flow. The third requirement is the resource allocation algorithm, the budget that sorts and directs your capital. And the final requirement is the optimization of liabilities to stop the leakage of capital. Attempting to execute any of these steps out of order renders your financial targets entirely hypothetical. To build a functional model, we must start at the end. Every functional system requires defined outputs before you can process a single input. You have to know where the capital is going. We can map out these financial targets by categorizing them across three distinct time horizons. Short-term goals prioritize immediate liquidity and safety, requiring capital that is easily accessible and shielded from market volatility. Establishing a fully funded emergency reserve is the primary objective of this category. Medium-term goals dictate your mid-range capital expenditures, where money is deployed over a multi-year horizon. This includes saving for a wedding, a future trip, or accumulating a down payment for a home. Long-term goals are terminal wealth-building objectives, requiring decades of compound growth to fund retirement or a child's college education. Assigning strict chronological deadlines to these goals dictates exactly how and when your capital must be deployed, preventing it from sitting stagnant. With the outputs defined, we must isolate the mandatory inputs required to fuel the system. This visualization shows cash flow tracking in action. It serves as the data-gathering sensor for the operating system, measuring exactly what enters and what leaks out. In data science, the reliability of any model is entirely dependent on the accuracy of its baseline data. Financial expert Gimza warns that understating or overstating your actual lifestyle spending habits results in a misleading financial plan. Processing inaccurate spending data creates a systemic breakdown. The model assumes capital is available for your goals when it has actually been lost to unaccounted expenses. To prevent this, you must use a tracking mechanism to perform a rigorous audit of your exact earnings versus your actual expenditures. Tools like Mint, YNAB, or a dedicated spreadsheet handles this data collection with the necessary precision. This tracking mathematically verifies whether your current capital deployment aligns with the goals you established in the first step. Without an honest audit of your cash flow, any budget you create is merely a guess, guaranteeing failure before execution begins. A proactive algorithm automatically sorts incoming capital to its highest utility, redefining the budget as an active strategy of deployment. The 50-30-20 rule provides a mathematically sound framework for this sorting process. The primary tier of the algorithm allocates 50% of your income to needs. This portion is strictly reserved for non-negotiable survival and operational expenses. These needs are centered on your primary requirements, such as housing and food. The secondary tier isolates 30% of the capital for wants. This tier exclusively funds your discretionary lifestyle choices. It covers expenditures like dining out, entertainment, and general lifestyle interests. Quarantining these wants into a 30% silo prevents lifestyle creep from expanding and siphoning capital away from your survival requirements. The final tier is the remaining 20. High-interest liabilities are particularly destructive. Revolving credit card debt is the most corrosive element to your long-term wealth. Optimization begins with a comprehensive inventory of what you owe, mapping out every student loan, medical bill, and credit card balance. You must then select a mathematical strategy to deploy your 20% allocation against these balances. The Snowball method directs capital to clear the smallest debt first, regardless of interest rates, before moving to the next smallest balance. This optimizes for behavioral psychology, using the momentum with cleared balances to encourage consistent progress. The Avalanche method targets the debt with the highest interest rate first, bypassing the overall size of the balances. This focuses strictly on mathematical efficiency, neutralizing high interest early to minimize the total capital lost over time. While the Avalanche method is mathematically superior, the Snowball method provides the psychological reinforcement many people need to stay on track. The optimal choice is whichever framework guarantees your consistent execution. Pulling back reveals the fully connected architecture of a functioning personal finance operating system. It operates as a deterministic chain reaction. Audited cash flow dictates the budget, and the budget allocates capital to systematically neutralize your debt. Once those high-interest liabilities are neutralized, you create an unobstructed channel for your capital to flow directly into your targeted time horizon goals. The active management of this structured algorithm mathematically guarantees specific life outcomes through the precise application of capital. Most people treat their personal finances as a series of isolated, reactive decisions. A bill arrives, an account balance drops, a purchase is made. Managing your money in this way, as a chaotic set of independent variables, is exactly what generates financial anxiety. Moving from that state of chronic unpredictability into a state of control requires abandoning ad hoc reactions. You have to stop reacting to the variables and write down a unified structural plan. Think of this as your personal financial baseline. It is an architectural blueprint designed to replace guesswork with absolute mathematical control over your resources. A resilient financial system is built on 4 interconnected risk mitigation pillars, specifically liquidity, compounding, asset transfer, and review. And like any physical structure, this framework must be constructed sequentially from the ground up. You begin by addressing immediate risks before engineering upward toward generational planning. You cannot achieve long-term financial stability without first engineering this baseline structure. Without it, the daily volatility of life will simply collapse the foundation. The first phase of construction focuses entirely on establishing a dedicated liquidity reserve. In common terms, this is an emergency fund. The primary function of this reserve is mechanical. It acts as a shock absorber for sudden systemic impacts, like an unexpected hospital bill or job loss. When you operate without this buffer, any unexpected expense forces an immediate reliance on highly toxic, high-interest debt instruments, primarily credit cards. By having cash set aside, you absorb the impact internally. The optimal baseline capacity for this buffer is holding a minimum of 3 months' worth of your total living expenses. Accumulating this capital takes time. It is structurally acceptable to target exactly 1 month's worth of expenses initially to get the system online. However, there is a strict operational rule tied to this reserve. If you are forced to extract capital from the buffer to survive an emergency, routing fresh capital to replenish it becomes your absolute highest priority. Long-term wealth building cannot mathematically occur until this liquidity baseline is secure. If it isn't, unforeseen shocks will inevitably cannibalize your future investments. Once the baseline is stable, the second architectural phase addresses a guaranteed future event, the eventual transition from your active working years to your non-working years. Eventually, your active income generation will cease entirely. When that happens, you require a new internal mechanism to sustain your ongoing outflow of capital. This visualization illustrates the structural deficit of state safety nets. While you will likely have access to Social Security, that payout cannot replace the entirety of your previous active income, leaving a massive empty gap. To bridge that specific income gap, massive private capital reserves must be stored and deployed over time. The optimal entry vehicle to store this capital is an employer-sponsored retirement plan, such as a 401k. Many employers offer matching contributions to these accounts. These are critical structural subsidies. It is essentially free money, and capturing that match is a non-negotiable step in building. If you operate without an employer sponsor, the routing vector changes. Your capital must be manually directed to a traditional or Roth IRA instead. Relying solely on a state-sponsored safety net guarantees a critical system failure in retirement. Proactive private capital routing is mandatory to survive the non-working phase. We've identified where to route the capital. Now we have to examine how that capital actually behaves across a long time horizon. The core engine of growth within any retirement vehicle is the mathematics of compounding interest. This line chart demonstrates compounding in action over a 30-year timeline. It acts as an exponential multiplier, generating returns not just on your initial principal, but continuously on the accumulated interest itself. To activate this mechanism, one behavioral requirement is absolute: unwavering consistency. Notice how regular input blocks aggressively drive the curve upward over time. The most effective way to guarantee consistency is to automate your contributions. This removes human error and decision fatigue and emotional variance from the system. True wealth generation rarely comes from attempting to time unpredictable market fluctuations. It relies almost entirely on the automated, long-term mathematical leverage of compounding interest. The third phase of the architecture focuses on securing the transfer of your accumulated assets in the event of your passing. There is a persistent misconception that estate planning is an exclusive protocol reserved only for the exceptionally wealthy. In reality, an estate plan is simply the essential legal routing logic that dictates exactly where your capital flows when you, the primary operator, are permanently removed from the system. The most fundamental tool in this phase is a simple will. This establishes a secure, unobstructed path to ensure an orderly, frictionless transfer of your assets to your designated heirs. The secondary tool to consider is a life insurance policy. This is critical if your beneficiaries currently rely on your active income to survive. Life insurance injects immediate capital to cover sudden expenses, preventing a severe liquidity crisis for your dependents, while your primary assets are being legally transferred. If you fail to install these legal routing protocols, a lifetime of meticulously structured capital accumulation can end in a chaotic tangle of inaccessible assets for your remaining family. When we zoom out, the individual components merge into a fully built, comprehensive, architectural framework. But the final constraint of the system is that life variables are never static. As your circumstances constantly change, your financial model must be highly adaptable. Financial experts mandate that this entire structural plan undergo a rigorous maintenance audit at least once a year. This annual review verifies your assets remain aligned with your ultimate goals. Off-cycle reviews are also required whenever primary datasets change. Events like a new job, major purchase, or sudden expense must immediately trigger a system recalibration. It is important to recognize that this comprehensive system does not have to be perfected on day one. It is a living, evolving tool designed to incrementally improve your reality over time. Whether you are mitigating the shock of a short-term emergency or methodically building generational wealth, putting this interconnected architecture in writing does one crucial thing. It permanently transforms financial anxiety into measurable, strategic control.